Hi everybody! Finally, I'm back, and I'm back with gifts. I've been MIA these last couple of weeks because I have been working really hard. I sort of fell into a sketching, pattern drafting, digitizing, iterating, testing world for my new sewing pattern, which hint, I'm wearing right now, because today is the day we are launching the Amelia dress. You've actually seen this one before because in my second to last video I did a design vlog around the first conception of this pattern, and you guys loved it so much, which made me even more excited about it. This pattern is inspired by the hourglass silhouette that was first introduced by the Vampire's Wife, which is a staple British brand that almost everybody knows. The brand was founded by Susie Cave, who happens to be the wife of famous musician Nick Cave. She first introduced these beautiful Victorian-esque dresses that are super sexy but not revealing at all, and I think that just struck a chord with so many women all around the globe because it just went everywhere. All the superstars were wearing it, and since then this type of silhouette has trickled over into lots of different brands and has been picked up by them for various different designs, which is why I am comfortable to offer my own take of the silhouette. I made this prototype a couple weeks ago. I have since made 2 more versions of this dress, which one of them I will present to you today, and I have another one planned. And that is because this pattern offers 22 plus potential pattern piece combinations. You heard me right. This is a pattern pack, which means it comes with 2 front bodice versions, it comes with 2 back bodice versions, it comes with 2 sleeve length and type versions, it comes with 2 skirt length versions, and it comes with optional ruffles in 2 varying heights. So one for the mini skirt and one for the midi skirt, and you also have the optional ruffled micro collar. So depending on what you pick and what you choose, you could make 22 plus different types of dresses with this one pattern pack. Yes. No, I'm not trying to get myself out of business. The silhouette of this dress is gonna give any woman, no matter her body type, an hourglass shape. I myself, I'm a pear-shaped girly, and this type of dress still gives me the most beautifully balanced proportions, and it also hugs the body in the right places, and the reason for that is the construction and the choices that were made when the pattern pieces were created. So one of the key elements of this pattern is the French angled bust dart. It comes on a 45-degree angle. It is slightly offset off your bust apex and feeds into the side seam. I offer 2 versions of this dart, one with just straight legs, which is a more universally applicable type of the dart, and one with curved legs, and that one is particularly for ladies in the itty bitty titty committee, which I'm a part of as well. And that curved bust dart will really hug your curves in the right places and give you this beautifully fitted bodice. The other thing about these 2 darts is that the curved bust dart is particularly well suited for lightweight fabrics such as silks and satins, and the straight-legged dart is perfect for more heavyweight fabrics such as corduroy, denim, cotton, or otherwise rigid fabrics. And that's the beauty of this dress as well. You could make this in potentially any type of fabric that you wish. I have so far made it with corduroy, I have made it with silk. I'm going to make it with a very cheap organza seersucker type of polyester. I have made it with satin. It is just so versatile, and it always looks amazing. How much fabric you actually need is stated in the Etsy listing. There is a materials slide in there that tells you exactly how much fabric you need for what version of the dress. As always, this dress is available in 7 sizes, European extra small to 3XL. And that's everything you need to know right now. So let's jump into the tutorial. Today, I'm going to make a midi length version of the dress with the elbow length sleeves that are sheared, and I'm gonna have an open back keyhole as well as ruffles around the skirt. It turned out beautifully, can't wait to show you, so let's get into it. Before you can start assembling your dress, you'll have to print and assemble your pattern as well as cut all of your pieces. There are 2 short explainer videos linked in the description box, which will help you to navigate through that process quickly. The pattern PDF files also have a pattern legend and cutting instructions included. Alright, we're gonna start top to bottom, and that means we're gonna grab our front bodice first. So we get the difficult part out of the way. We do have a French angled bust dart that is curved, as you can see. So let's start by sewing it in. As you can see, I have placed a needle here at the end of my bust dart through both layers. I'm now gonna remove the paper pattern. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna place a needle at the end of the dart on both sides without actually pinning the two layers together. I'm now going to turn my pattern piece right sides touching. The reason why I cut it with the right sides facing out is so that I could control the placement of the print a little bit. But now what I want to do is actually mark my dart, so I have to turn it inside out. Now I fetch my paper pattern again and I place it down. And the reason why I had placed a pin here before is so that I can see approximately how the pattern was placed. Now I'm gonna grab some tailless chalk in a color that will be visible on my fabric, and I'm gonna carefully start to outline the dart. The reason I'm doing this is because we do have this curve here, and we need to make sure that we follow the curve on both sides of the dart, and it's easier when it's marked. Now that one side is done, I'm gonna lift my paper pattern. You could now either turn it around or you could grab some wax paper. Wax paper looks like this, and it's literally paper that has wax on one side. And what I like to do is I just slip it under my piece, and then I get a spiked roller, which looks like this. And then I follow the mark that I've just created to transfer the same shape onto the other side. And as you can see, now the dart is transferred to this side. I can open the two sides and start pinning my dart in. So this dart is placed on a 45-degree angle, and that is so that we utilize the bias of our fabric. So I'm now placing this on top of each other as best as I can, making sure that when I go through the fabric with a pin, I catch my chalk markings on both sides. So you can see that I have pinned it so that I follow the markings on both sides, and I've also pinned it so that I can easily remove the pins when I have it in my sewing machine. If you have this pyramid shape here, you can also check for any puckering. So for example, I think that here I could do a slightly better job, so I'm just gonna go back in. Once I'm happy, I'm gonna take this to my sewing machine. I'm gonna use a stitch length of 2.5 millimeters on my machine. If you work with delicate fabric like I do make sure to use a sharp needle. So the darts are in now, but to reveal their true shape, it is very important to press them now. And there's a certain way to press them, and I will show you how to do that. For these double S-shaped darts to really reveal their true shape, there's a certain way to press them. First of all, we're going to start at the side seam. What you want to do is you want to grab the waist and pull it away from the side a little bit. And then you go over your dart like this. Just do it a few times, swipe over it a few times, like this. Next up, you want to work on the tip of the dart. So you go in with the angular point of your iron and go into the dart while lifting the mid part of the bodice up a little bit. Go over it a few times once again, and then you work your way towards the middle, and you keep navigating this area, the waist area, around. You keep pulling it away from the dart while you swipe over the actual seam with your iron to make it go flat. So now when you turn the dart around, you can see that your seam is flat, but there is some volume happening, and this is exactly the volume that you will need for your bust dart. What you do not want to do is go over it like this, because that way you distort the fiber of the fabric and it goes flat and it starts warping in weird ways. You really want to try and work around your seam to honor its actual shape. And you can see when the side seam goes straight, there is some ease appearing in the waist, and that's perfectly normal. This is the exact amount of material that should be here. You don't have to worry about that. And this is how you press that dart. Alright, let's move on to the back. For this version of the dress, I decided to go with the keyhole option, and the pieces for this open back situation look like this. They will eventually be lined. I'll show you that in a later step, but for now we need to join this piece with this piece. You will see that there's notches here, and you want to make sure that you transfer them to your actual fabric because they help you orient yourself in terms of like where you need to place things. So I'm gonna make sure that I add a little notch here in my seam allowance. These are my two sides, and now I'm gonna pin the top to the bottom, right sides touching. So I fold the top down like so. And what I want to make sure is I now follow my guidance with my notch. However, I know that I have 1 centimeter seam allowance, so I move from that notch point 1 centimeter towards the center back, and that's where I am going to pin this piece down. And then I follow the curve to the side seam. I'm now going to sew these seams. An important note for how you attach this is also that you want to stop exactly where your notch starts, so your seam allowance here for the top part of your bag can roam freely, because we need access to this tip later on when we line the bag. Now we want to press it, because that's an important step as well. Now that our back pieces are sewn together and beautifully pressed, we can grab our front piece and place it right sides touching. We are now going to pin together our shoulder seams as well as our side seams. The side seam of the front is straight onto the side seam of the back. We don't want our angled bust dart to irritate us, because sometimes it might be that this tip of the dart looks out like that, like so. And you then want to take the shortest route from this end to this end, and you in the process sew away a bunch of real estate that you need eventually. So what you want to do is you want to pull the side seam in to make it straight and fit the side seam of the back, if that makes sense. So we're going to start pinning in the armpit. Now when we get down here, like I said before, we're going to push the end of the dart in like so and keep following the straight seam. Now I'm going to sew both my shoulder and my side seams. Anything from your seam allowance from the dart that is too much here, you can just cut back like so to clean it up. And now we have our bodice sewn together, and I'm immediately going to go and press my side seams towards the back and my shoulder seams towards the back as well. Let's move on to the skirt. So we are going to start with the back skirt panels, which are 2. The first thing we want to do here is to sew in our darts, which we have plenty of. What I like doing is I place a needle at the tip of my dart where it's supposed to end, and I use those to orient myself around the fabric. I have notches in the waist seam as to how wide they are, and then I simply sew my triangle down like so. So now that the darts in the back as well as in the front skirt are in, we can go ahead and actually sew the center back together. There is a notch in your pattern as to where your zipper should end, and this is so that you can easily step into the dress. So what I'm going to do now is I will sew the center back with a normal stitch length of 2.5 up until the notch point for my zipper. Again, that is in the pattern, and then from here I'm going to change it to a basting stitch, so when I press it open I can easily open that section back up again. But because there was a seam and I have pressed it open, there's a mark in as to where I need to insert my zipper later. That's just for installment reasons. I will now take this to my iron and press it open. The center back seam is nicely pressed open. I'm now going to place it in front of me, right sides facing up like this. And then I grab my front skirt and place it right sides facing down to actually pin together the side seams, which is what we're going to do now. So front and back are sewn together, and I've also pressed the side seams towards the back. Now I open the basted section of my center back seam up again before I can join the skirt with the top. All right, let's fetch our bodice. So to join the top with the skirt, there's a few things you want to make sure. One is that you have a notch in your center front point in the skirt waist as well as in the waist of your bodice, because this is where you're going to start pinning. So you want to grab your bodice and place it right sides down onto your skirt and align those notches with each other. You then want to move on to the side seams and align those with each other. Then you're going to pin the sections in between. And then we move on to the back and simply align the two with each other. All right, once the waist is pinned, you can sew it. Exciting! Our top and skirt are joined. I'm now gonna go and press my seam allowance of the waist seam all the way down to give it a nice flat finish. And then we're gonna have our first fitting. So let's talk about the fit. This is what the pattern looks for me right out of the box. I made 0 alterations so far. I want to give you a few pointers right now so you can get the perfect fit for yourself as well. Let's start talking about the bust darts. This is what they look for me right out of the box. So obviously, because I'm my first guinea pig, I can only work with my own proportions, trying to make them as universal as possible, but still they will kind of like adhere to my golden ratio. So the bust dart at the moment ends slightly over my actual and slightly off my actual bust apex, and that is on purpose. This is what you want your bust to look like. As you can see, this double S shape of the dart gives us this super figure hugging quality. So don't be deterred if the tip of your dart doesn't end exactly at your bust apex. It should end slightly above it and slightly off to the side, like this. Now let's talk about the armhole and neck hole. At the moment, because we do have the seam allowance right here, it looks like the shoulder is a little bit too wide, but do not forget, when we insert our sleeves, the armhole is going to open by about 1 centimeter all around the perimeter, so it's going to fit perfectly for me. The same thing applies to the neck hole. At the moment it looks a little bit tight, but don't forget, when we add our standing collar, or even if we just overturn it with facing or lining, we will remove 1 centimeter around the perimeter, and the design of the dress is meant to be quite crew neck, quite a tight crew neck. Obviously it shouldn't suffocate you, but don't be misguided by the fit of it right now because it's going to get bigger. Now let's talk about the back. This is what the keyhole looks like for me right out of the box. It is a tiny little bit loose, but I do know that once I put the lining in and once I place the invisible zipper, it's probably going to fit just right. What I might do is take away just a little bit more here in the center back than the seam allowance that I gave myself, maybe 1/2 centimeter, just to make it a smidge more tight. Other than that, I'm pretty happy with the keyhole because it's not gaping in any way, shape or form. Generally speaking, this is kind of what your dress should fit like. As you can see, it is really quite close to my actual body, but it is not too tight. What I wouldn't want is for it to sit like this, because obviously that's not going to be very comfortable for me in the long run. We do need a little bit of wiggle room, which the pattern provides. At the same time, you don't want this to be too bellish. So if you feel like there is too much right here, you want to take that in just a little bit, because the design of the dress is such that this section should be really quite straight looking. Not too A-line, not too bellish, not too tight, definitely not fit and flare, just straight. So I'm quite happy with the fit of this, so I'm not going to make any alterations, which means I can now move on to preparing my sleeves. So this is our sleeve pattern, which comes in 3 sizes. You have extra small to small, medium to large, and extra large to 3XL, which is a slightly bigger increment change than the other 2. You want to make sure that you give yourself the notch right here, because this is important when we insert the sleeve a little bit later. And as you can see down here, we have these 2 sections, which are the cuff and the cuff facing. So what I probably want to do is to give myself a notch for my line, which is a continuous line, the medium to large size, exactly where they are. Like this. So when I now remove the pattern and I open the sleeve, if I take this now to my iron, I can fold it for the first notch right here. It's my fold point, and fold it up like this. This is my little ruffle section eventually, because we're going to shear the sleeve above this ruffle section. This is eventually going to be a nice little flare around our elbow. So what I want to do is I first am going to serge this raw edge here, because I just want to make sure that it's not fraying. If you do not have a serger, simply give it a rolling hem or a simple hem to make sure it's not fraying. And then you're going to go and fold it over like I've just shown you and press it down. So I'm going to do this for both of my sleeves now. This is what my sleeve looks like right now. You can see that the raw edge is serged, and I folded it over by the amount as indicated in the pattern, which is roughly 4 centimeters. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to shear my sleeve, and I'm going to show you how to do that. We need an empty bobbin and some shearing elastic. You can order this online or get it in store if you've never used it before. And if you ask somebody for shearing elastic, they know exactly what you mean. So we're going to grab this and we're going to wind our bobbin manually by hand. So what we need to do is we need to secure the shearing elastic by one hand and then start winding it with the other. And what we want to make sure is that we don't add too much tension. It is not too stretched, but it's also not too loose. What you don't want is that when you let go, it just pops off all the way, because that means you've added too much tension. So just the right amount. is important. And I'm now gonna pop this into my sewing machine. So when we pop this into a sewing machine, the same rules as for normal bobbin apply. For me, that would be to make sure that the thread is caught by the tension disc. And then once it is, I'm just gonna pull it up with my top thread, which by the way is gonna stay the same because we wanna make sure that it's invisible. On the outside, we use the same color as we've used before. Now, once your machine is threaded correctly, you want to test the shearing. So you grab an old piece of fabric, some remnant piece, ideally the same one as your shell fabric, and you want to make sure that you set your machine to the biggest stitch length available. The bigger the stitch length, the more dramatic the shearing. So I'm gonna go all the way up to 5, which is my biggest stitch, and then I'm gonna test the shearing. And I can see that it works exactly as it should. It's actually quite a big shear, quite a strong shear. So I might want to go down by half a stitch length, and again, works perfect. Right, so now I can go and shear my actual cuff. So like I said, I have pinned this so that my cuff that's eventually going to be ruffled is folded up and under, and I'm going to use the measurement plate on my machine, which most machines have, to adhere to the 4 centimeter guide. So from here, I'm simply going to use my press-a-foot as a guide. So I'm going to set the press-a-foot down right where the previous seam ended, like this. And this is how I'm going to do probably 6 to 8 rows of shearing right now. Alright, so we have our sheared cuffs here. They look beautiful and pretty, and I'm very happy with them. And now I'm going to finish the sleeves by folding them right sides touching and sewing the side seams. Normally, and I know that some of you will be thinking that, what you would have done is sewed the side seam first and folded the cuff over after, so you have a beautiful finish here. But it's easier to do it this way so that you have easy access for the shearing. And now what you want to make sure is that you have a flush finish down here at the cuff. So you want to place your pin exactly there so that eventually everything is even and flush. And then the next thing you want to make sure is that the shearing starts at the same point. So you also want to place a pin here and it ends at the same point. So these are the important bits that should align ideally for a professional clean finish on the outside. And if you have followed the pattern exactly, then that will be the case. And now I sew the inseam of the sleeve, and I will also immediately serge it. We now have a completely finished bodice and skirt in our shell material, and I took some time off camera to reproduce the exact same thing in my lining material. This is non-static lining material that you would use for suits or coats, for example, and I've just taken the exact same steps, so we have 2 identical copies, except for I immediately went and finished my hem because we're gonna add ruffles to the hem of the shell a little bit later. Now we can actually prepare our micro collar that is gonna go in around the neckline, and then we can join the shell and the lining together. So we have now this piece for our micro collar. We have cut it on a fold, so this is our center front. And the way we are going to prepare this is, I'm going to fold this over now, like so. And before I take it to my iron, I'm gonna go ahead and sew down the sides to give myself a neat finish. I'm now gonna sew these down. I am now going to turn around this piece, so overturn it, and I'm going to take it to my iron and press it down like so. Now that the collar looks like this, what we're going to do is we're going to take it to our sewing machine and add 2 rows of basting stitches to this raw edge down here, and that is so that we can easily ruffle up the micro collar all around our neckline. And now 2 parallel rows of basting stitches along this raw edge. Now we have the 2 basting stitches. Now let's fetch our shell and lining to join everything together. So I want to start out with just my shell. What I'm going to do is to grab my micro collar, and with the center front notch point that I gave myself while I cut it, I'm going to place that down onto the center front notch point of my bodice. I'm then gonna go all the way back to the center back, and I'm going to place the collar just 1 centimeter shy of the end of what I've got here, and that is because this is seam allowance. And then the same thing on the other side. And now we can use our basting stitch rows to gather down each side to the actual perimeter of our neckline. So I'm just grabbing the 2 upper or lower threads of my basting stitches, it doesn't really matter which one, and then I start gathering the collar. Right, so once I have gathered it down and they're both the same distance, I just distribute it so it's ruffled nicely all the way around, and then I can pin it down. So the micro collar is pinned onto the neckline, and I'm now going to stitch this down. What we want to do is we want to sandwich the collar in between the lining and the shell, having the shell and the lining right sides facing. So this is the right side of my lining, this is the right side of my shell, and I'm placing them like so. And as I've just done it with the micro collar, I'm now going to start pinning the 2 together from the center front point onwards. In this case, I also want to make sure that my shoulder seams line up, so I'm moving from the center front point down to the shoulders, and they match up perfectly, and then all the way back to the center back. What we also want to do is to make sure that we're not sewing the tip of our micro collar here when we go down the keyhole. So I'm just going to pin that out of the way to be sure. And when we reach this back section here, we're just going to continue pinning around the keyhole. And now when we go down here to this corner of the keyhole, we can see this intersection of seams here. And what we want to do while we sew is to really go all the way up until the seam right here. So sew down this way, and we then don't go over this intersection. We then lift our needle and pivot the back so that we can do the same thing from the other side for this straight part of the keyhole, which is the lower neckline in the back. So here also you want to go in as far as you can while lifting this seam allowance up to go all the way to the end of this seam right here. And this is how you get a really nice and clean finish from the outside. Okay, so now that all of this is pinned, we get to the exciting part, which is to sew all the way from one side of the center back around the keyhole, around our neckline to the other side. And what we also want to make sure is that we hide the seam that's already here, which sewed down the micro collar, so that when we eventually turn everything outside out, this is hidden away. I'm gonna sew this first section. And like I said before, I'm gonna make sure that I go all the way up to the seam without going over it. Then I lift my needle, I fold the seam allowance to the other side, I pivot my piece, and I start at that exact point again and sew the rest of my keyhole. So now that we have sewn this, I'm going to snip the seam allowance all the way up to the actual seam, and this is to help the collar stand up and the curvature of the neckline to really nicely reveal itself. And now we can turn things outside out. So I'm going in and I'm turning everything around, and ideally we should find a beautifully attached collar and a beautifully lined dress. And as you can see, the keyhole here in the back also seems to have worked out pretty well. And now I'm going to give this a really good press to really show what it looks like. So we are in the final stretch. The back is beautifully lined and overturned. I also took a minute to understitch the seam allowance. So I basically folded the seam allowance on the inside towards the side of the lining, and then I top stitched on the side of the lining to keep it from showing on the outside. That just helps with that a little bit. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to prepare my armholes for the sleeves. Because our bodice is lined but the sleeves are not lined, what I'm doing is I'm going to baste around the armhole to keep the two layers of the lining and the shell together, because that seam is later going to be serged. Now that I've pasted around my armholes and secured them, I'm gonna go ahead and start pinning in my sleeves. So I'm grabbing one of them, there's not really a side, and I'm starting at one side of my armholes. So where I wanna start is I'm gonna grab the inseam of my sleeve and I'm gonna place it on the side seam of my bodice, and I'm gonna pin it down starting from here. You do have a notch point in your sleeve pattern, which shows you how far you want to pin the sleeve in flat. So I'm gonna go and pin all the way around the armhole, just keeping my sleeve flat. Now the next thing I do is I reach inside of the dress and I'm gonna grab the side seam, I'm gonna pull it inside out so I have easier access to pin the rest of the sleeve. Pin the back side, and the same thing applies here. I'm gonna pin flat all the way until I reach that notch point. And once I'm there, I can see how much ease I have and what's the distance that I need to pin the ease down to get the ruffle around the shoulder apex. So I also have a notch in the midpoint of my sleeve shoulder, which I'm going to pin down to the shoulder seam of my bodice. And now I have these two ease sections here, front and back, which I'm gonna fold down by hand in little pleats. So once I've pinned it down, I turn it around and have a look and see if I'm happy with the placement of the ruffle. Again, that should be mostly around the apex of your shoulder. You want the rest of your sleeve to be pinned in flat, and the notch points will help you achieve that. And then I'm gonna sew it down. So both my sleeves are sewn in, and what you want to check is that your shoulder seams on both sides are the exact same distance. Perfect. Now what you need to do is you need to finish your raw edges on the inside. You would do that either with bias binding or with a serger, depending on what you have available. So the next thing I'll do is attach the ruffle to the hem. This is our skirt ruffle piece. It looks like this. This comes in 3 size categories, so extra small to small, medium to large, and extra large to 3XL. Now you have one side that is your center front and center back, which means that you need to cut 2 pieces on a fold like this. So when I open this up, you can see I have one long panel. Now what we're gonna do is we are going to sew together the sides of each of these panels. I also gave my midpoint a little notch so I can easily identify it, and that applies for both pieces. So I place them right sides touching, and then I'm gonna sew together what is eventually gonna be aligned with the side seam of the skirt. Now that we have this long scarf here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add 2 rows of basting stitches all the way around this upper edge, and this is so that eventually we can easily gather down the perimeter of this to the perimeter of our hem. So 2 rows of basting stitches. I'm gonna set my machine to the biggest stitch length available for me, that is 5, and I'm just gonna go all the way around. The basting stitches are added, but before we actually attach this to our skirt, I'm immediately gonna go and hem my actual hem, and I'm gonna do this with a rolling hem. So I'm gonna fold it over by a minimal amount and stitch as closely to this edge as possible. I'm then gonna cut back the seam allowance that's remaining and roll it over once again and top stitch that down to create this small rolled hem. And I think for materials like this, any type of satin or slippery fabric like this is the best option for hems. So now we get to do something pretty fun, which is attaching the ruffle to the skirt hem. You might remember that I've already finished the hem of the lining on the inside, so that is out of the question. That's gonna hang loose inside of the skirt. We're just gonna focus on the hem of the shell material. So we have our ruffle part here, and what we need to do is we need to find the notch point for the front and back. I have already given myself a notch point in my center front, and now I'm gonna grab my ruffle scarf and place it right sides facing with the shell skirt and align these parts. So I'm going to place a pin here. Next I'm going to align the side seam of the ruffle and the side seam of the skirt with each other. And then last but not least, I'm going to find my center back notch in my ruffle, and I'm going to align that with my center back seam. So now that I've pinned the ruffle and the skirt together in these 4 places, I have 4 sections of ease. So 2 in the front and 2 in the back. I'm going to start with just 1 section, and now I can start to gather together, like I've done with the micro collar, my ruffle tier. And when I'm happy with the ruffle placement, I'm going to pin it to the hem of my skirt. And I'm going to do this now 3 more times to go all the way around my skirt. So we've reached the final step, which is inserting the invisible zipper. I have two options for colors here. I do feel like the light green one is more the correct color family than this one. While this is darker, it's also more screaming in a way and brighter, so I'm gonna go for this one. Now we're gonna pin in the zipper. We're gonna start on one side. I'm gonna separate the two layers of lining and shell, and I'm gonna start pinning the zipper just into the shell layer. We want to have the face of the zipper facing down, so basically right sides touching with the shell. I'm now going to baste that first side of the zipper down. I am going to grab some tailless chalk and I'm going to mark exactly where my waist seam hits from one side of the zipper to the other, like this. So now I know that I have to align this marking with the waist seam on the other side. Now I can sew the other side. So now that the zipper is basted in, it's a good time to try the dress. If you're happy with the fit, you can proceed to the next steps, which are, we now need to change the zipper foot on our machine to a invisible zipper foot to sew as closely to the teeth of the zipper as possible to make it truly invisible. I do not have an invisible zipper foot, so what I will do is I'll uncurl the teeth of the zipper and sew in the ditch that reveals itself. That has the same effect as sewing with a zipper foot. So the zipper is in. It looks like this right now when it's closed. And now the very last step will be to hide the zipper away completely on the inside as well, which is what we have our lining for. So what you want to do is you want to separate the lining and the shell, and then right here at your neckline, you're going to fold it over and you will pin it along like this. And you want to make sure that you're hiding your zipper, sandwiching it in between the two layers of lining and shell. Again, you want to make sure that your waist seam lines up, and you do this on one side first all the way down to the end of your zipper. Then you go to the other side and repeat the same step. You can then turn everything outside out once again, press your dress, and you're done. I have the zipper hidden away nicely between the lining and the shell, and we're done.
I am here for you. I am all for you. 나의 손을 잡아 나를 바라봐 변하지 않아 널 향한 내 맘 It's more than just a feeling.
Alright, that's it. That was a quite extensive tutorial video. I hope it was helpful. I hope it went into detail on everything you would possibly want to know about the construction of the Amelia dress. I am very proud of this pattern and I hope you love it as much as I do, and I hope you give it a go. Amelia is now available through my Etsy shop. If you do have any questions about the dress at all, please do reach out to me on Etsy. Generally speaking, I hope you enjoyed this video as always. Let me know what you think about the final result. I actually have another Amelia video in the making right now. You can see a glimpse of her right here behind me. So you will be seeing a lot more of this dress in the next couple of weeks, and I'm not mad about it at all. With that being said, thank you so much for letting me be a part of your day as always, and I see you next time. Bye! Hi everybody! It is finally time! Finally! What's with the jazz hands?